Hi, everyone. First off, thanks to the Rotary Club of Orlando for having me. Thanks, Bill, for the invitation, and Rich, David, and Tammy for getting me set up to speak today. And as Bill said, I know this is kind of unusual to hear that we need a coral rescue center in Central Florida. It sounds a little strange at first, and it's entirely possible some folks haven't even heard about any need for a coral rescue center and what is that all about. So what I'm going to do is give you the background on why we need a coral rescue center, and then we'll look at the facility itself and explain exactly what we're doing. So what started down in the Florida Reef Tract. The Florida Reef Tract is Florida's barrier reef. There aren't too many barrier reefs out there in the world, but we're fortunate to have one on our coast. And that barrier reef serves a lot of purposes. It protects the coastline, it provides habitat for marine life, and it's actually what we would consider a building block of the ocean ecosystem, quite frankly. And it's been affected by what we call stony coral tissue loss disease. And corals are susceptible to a number of diseases. There's black band disease, yellow band disease, all kinds of stuff out there. And they're very, very sensitive animals. And if you're familiar at all with corals, corals are a colonial invertebrate, okay? When you see a piece of coral, there's some pictures here up on the screen. These are a group of individual animals all living together to create this colony. And that colony produces a skeleton. And the skeleton is important because it creates structure for the reef. That's the basis for the coral reef. That's what protects the coastline. That's what prevents storm surge. That's what helps provide habitat for all these animals. So, as I said, these corals are susceptible to a number of diseases. You've also probably heard of coral bleaching before. That's impacting the Great Barrier Reef right now. But something that popped up in 2014 is this SCTLD, or stony coral tissue loss disease. This is something we haven't seen before up until that time. And it's a devastating disease. It has an almost 100% mortality rate for these corals. These corals that are affected represent 20 out of the 45 species that are on the Florida Reef Tract. The Florida Reef Tract goes from Martin County, just north of West Palm, all the way down through Key West and to the Dry Tortugas. So it's a huge 30-mile area. And, when you consider that 20 of the 45 corals that are living out there are impacted by this, and it has an almost 100% mortality rate as soon as there's an infection on that piece of coral, again, you can see these pictures, it just devastates the entire colony. Here's a representation of where that Florida Reef Tract is. You can see how it's migrated over the years from 2014 to today. Unfortunately, the disease has actually left from Key West, the west side of Key West, to the Marquesas, to the Dry Tortugas about 6 weeks ago. So what happened was our colleagues in FWC, or the Fish and Wildlife, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission and NOAA have been monitoring this. There's been researchers at the university level, folks that are funded by state and federal government looking at this disease, trying to figure out if there's a way to intervene. They've tried some treatments out there locally on the corals themselves, trying to figure out what the cause is of this disease. And they haven't come up with an answer yet, believe it or not, in the last 7 years. And we do know it has some microbial component to it. There is some efficacy with antibiotics, but the reality is treating an individual coral is not going to get it done. Not when we're talking tens of thousands of pieces of coral. Also on this representation here on the slide, you can see that not only on the Florida Reef Tract, but there's some spots in the Caribbean where this disease has leapfrogged into some other local ecosystems in the Caribbean, which is, of course, not a good sign. So What causes this? Well, again, we really don't know, but what we do know is there's a high probability this disease has been around for decades. Think of, your own immune system or some of the terrestrial ecosystems that we see. Diseases will just pop up out of nowhere. Now, it's not that necessarily the disease just appeared, but it was probably latent in the environment, and the environmental conditions changed as such to where now it has an impact on the coral. There's a lot going on out in the ocean environment. I'm sure you all hear about it pretty routinely. There's climate change possibilities, there's pH levels in the ocean that are changing slowly over time, carbon dioxide levels that are going up in the ocean environment, pollution, any number of things like that can affect the resistance of the coral. So that disease, which may have been latent, not impacting anything for decades, once the resistance level is down on the corals, now it can take a foothold, and the coral can't, affect any type of resistance for this disease. So why is the Florida Reef Track important? I don't know how many folks go down to the Keys. I love going down to the Keys. I enjoy diving in the Keys and fishing, having a drink or two. But, as I said, it protects the Florida coastline. If that barrier reef was not there, the Florida coastline would not look the way it does today. It would be something completely different. And certainly we would not have the wonderful ecosystem that we have down there for everyone to enjoy. On the right side of that slide, I just wanted to acknowledge that, tourism down in the Keys is profound. It's billions of dollars a year that go through the Florida Keys, and all of that has an impact on all of us, whether we're in Central Florida, Southeastern United States, and so on. This type of event can have a ripple effect through all of us, certainly economically, and more importantly, how it impacts our environment, because everything is tied together. I think we know that in the year 2021, that from an environmental perspective, anytime you impact one of those building blocks of the environment, it's going to have a ripple effect and affect everything around us. The response that folks are working on, I mentioned some of our state and federal partners. They've engaged a lot of different private and public partners as far as looking at how we're going to manage this. We know right now that the disease has moved so quickly with such efficacy through the Florida Reef Track that there was no control that we could put in place on the coastline or out on the reefs. So we had to do something dramatic. FWC and NOAA engaged the AZA, which is the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, which they are a nonprofit organization that most zoos and aquariums belong to, as kind of a unifying organization for different avenues. And the FWC and NOAA asked, hey, can you engage some of your constituency, these zoos and aquariums that have all of this coral expertise, and help us save these corals? So ultimately what we did as kind of the last resort was, you can see in some of these pictures, this is folks where they tried to use antibiotic topical ointments on the coral that's on the top left side of the screen there, and some different methods. Ultimately, it was decided we have to pull these corals out of the wild. There is no other option. So there was a concerted effort between all of those state and local private and public partners to start extracting corals from the reefs well ahead of the disease line. And that's exactly what we did. So as of right now, we have 22 different partners across AZA who have all taken in these corals. We've done anything we could. We threw them in holding systems that we had in our fish facilities. We slapped together tubs and pumps and filters, in warehouses and whatnot. And in our particular case, we actually joined up with some of our local partners, and specifically Disney Conservation Fund, as well as the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida, which is a nonprofit organization that does tremendous work in funding different environmental projects, as well as the AZA. So what we decided to do is try to find a facility that we could contribute to. As I said, this is just kind of a recap of everything. Right now, we have almost 2,000 pieces of coral in managed care or in safe facilities right now, unaffected by the stony coral tissue loss disease. And, you know, we tried to get a cross section of all these 20 species that were affected. We've done a pretty good job with that. The challenge is if you're into genetics at all, which I know, you know, we all love genetics, but with each species, 20 of those species, there can be up to 12 to 15 different genotypes. And the point there is there's just a lot of genetic diversity, even within that coral species itself. So we have to take a representative group of each species and spread them out, right? We don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket. So we spread them out amongst all the 22 facilities. So that gets us to the Florida Coral Rescue Center. We're located just off of OBT. We're actually kind of behind the Mazda and BMW dealerships down on South OBT, just north of Central Florida Parkway. And we're in a commercial park. We're in a commercial bay. I'll tell you how we got there in just a sec. But the real highlight, I think, outside of just the tremendous work of saving these corals is the partnership that we developed. So Disney and SeaWorld, along with AZA and the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida, all got together and said, we're going to participate in this facility. As you know, SeaWorld and Disney are competitors in the theme park world, all trying to get that market share of the folks that like to migrate down here year over year. But in this case, you know, when it comes to conservation, animal work, the environment, we're on the same page. And to be honest with you, the folks that work on the animal side and conservation side over at Disney, a lot of us are, you know, we're all colleagues. We've known each other forever. So we all work together on the right projects and really try to make a difference. What was interesting about this facility, we knew we had a short time frame. The corals are getting wiped out. We have to be able to get them in safe locations as quickly as possible. So we reached out to some of our retail partners. There's some folks out there that are very engaged with the fish hobby industry, billions of dollars going through that industry. They do a lot of retail sales. We were looking for equipment, tubs, pumps, filters, anything we could get to throw together, you know, some holding systems for these corals. Our colleagues at Worldwide Corals, which have their headquarters down on Central Florida Parkway, they have a big retail industry, and they do a lot of mail order. They do a lot of aquaculture with corals, and they said, hey guys, we're actually selling our coral farm, if you could believe that there's such a thing, but yes, there is. They had this massive coral farm at this location, and they said, hey, would you be interested in buying that out? Because we're going to move our location to something larger. We outgrew this facility. So we agreed, and we got Disney together, and this is just a quick look at what they had built. They had 5 different systems and about 7,000 gallons of water to be able to hold corals. They did a great job with it on the retail side. They had it for about 2 years. So what was great for us is we didn't have to build something new, and we didn't have to troubleshoot it, right? It had 2 years under its belt. It worked perfectly. It was effective for keeping corals safe, because I can't state this enough. Corals are just super sensitive. Any little tweak in temperature, lighting, chemistry, anything like that, they get upset, they'll bleach out, they lose their zooxanthellae, which is a symbiotic algae. We won't get into that. I'll probably lose everybody if I go too far. But, you know, we found this as such a great opportunity, plug and play. And the way it breaks down is basically SeaWorld operates the facility. We provide the coral expertise. We have the staff that work there. Myself and Justin Zimmerman oversee from a management perspective. And Disney provides the operational funding, which is incredible. That keeps the lights on and keeps us going. And then the Fish and Wildlife Foundation of Florida, they're our direct business partner. They're the folks that hold the lease for the commercial bay. They bought all the equipment that was in the facility that was sold by Worldwide Corals. And then, you know, they hold all the utilities and all that good stuff. And AZA is kind of our umbrella facilitator, keeps everything going. So real quick, we have 753 corals in the facility. 18 holding tanks, almost 7,000 gallons of water. We put our first corals in March of last year. So we've actually been around for a little bit, but we didn't really announce ourselves to the public until about 2 months ago. COVID hit, and all of our partners agreed it wasn't the best time to try to talk about the facility with everybody, with all the news cycle going a different direction. A lot of hardware here. There's probably no fish hobbyists out there, right? Anybody? There you go. So you might appreciate this. It's all top of the line equipment that we have from some of our partners. Ecotech Marine is a phenomenal fabricator of really cool equipment. But anyway, it's a pretty sweet operation. That's our team, and they do a fantastic job, all coral experts. Then that's just a little bit of what they do every day. They have to feed the coral. If you can see that center picture, they actually wear the little headlamps first thing in the morning because the corals feed at night. So the coral polyps are all out ready for food. The guys put their headlamps on before the lights come up, and they have to turkey baste food particles into the corals to keep them happy. So that's one of the cool jobs they do, but they do a lot more maintaining chemistry and so on. That's the list of the 18 species we have. I would appreciate it if you would all memorize this for me so we can talk about it later. And keys to success, just want to kind of look at that. It's really our partners. It's having the right biologists on the team. It's our partnerships. We do have high-end monitoring. We have a very sophisticated security system because effectively these corals are priceless. So we can't have anybody entering the facility. So I wouldn't even try it. I won't give you the address, but we don't want to go down that road. But I'm going to try this video. I'm not sure, maybe.
The Florida Reef Tract has been in trouble for decades. Lots of different types of stressors have been affecting the corals and then therefore other organisms that live on the Florida Reef Tract.
There's just a lot of people who don't know that stony coral tissue loss disease is ravaging the Florida Reef Tract. And so one of our main challenges is just spreading the word that this is not only a problem for folks directly next to the reef, but for the health of the whole state and really the health of our oceans and water.
The future of coral restoration for the Florida Reef Tract will include using these corals that were rescued as part of the rescue effort. Those corals will be bred to create new genetic diversity, and then once they are large enough to be outplanted and used in restoration, then they will actually be replaced on the reef to be the next generation of corals for the Florida Reef Tract.
It's a wonderful collaboration. We are working together. What's great about this relationship is that we're working in our own backyard.
We prepared for this moment by bringing together some of the best equipment in Orlando, the best knowledge in Orlando. The Coral Rescue Center is definitely one of the highest tech, highest experienced facilities that we have in the world, I think, right now for coral growth. We have brought together a team of not only ourselves, but with Disney, AZA, and many other partners to put this facility together. And I think that's really shows that everybody's interested in saving these corals.
The Disney team is so excited to be part of this conservation effort, to be able to bring our decades of experience to the table and get involved with groups that are so passionate about coral conservation. And it's a chance to make a really meaningful difference.
All right, just one point I want to recap on there is the fact that the corals that we have at these 22 facilities are what we call our founders. So the goal is to actually sexually reproduce these corals, take their offspring and outplant the offspring back to the Florida Reef Tract. So that's a real delicate process. Some of these corals only spawn once a year. In fact, when we get towards the middle of August, that's the crunch time for us. So to get these little coral larvae, get them to settle out, grow them up to about size of a nickel or so, and get them back out on the reefs. So it's a big project. Lots of cool stuff happening. And again, I'm sure it's something y'all haven't heard about before, but you know, the big focus is saving the Florida Reef Tract. So I really do appreciate your time and enjoyed speaking with you.
What do you think about there's two questions. First, what do you think the effect of the invasive species lionfish has caused?
I think that's a great point. There is no question that the lionfish are having an effect. I don't know how much it's affecting the corals directly. However, there are species. I'm sorry?
I said the ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. There are species of fish though that do help. They're actually groomers for the coral. They have some level of symbiotic relationship, kind of not in the traditional sense, but they help with, you know, coral parasites and things like that. And of course, they're bite-sized for the lionfish. So absolutely, there's going to be at least an indirect relationship.
If anybody sees a lionfish when they're dying, stay far away. They're vicious monsters and they're poisonous. The other thing is, what about the use of fragging rather than waiting for them to breed?
We absolutely can do that, and there's a little bit of a direction with that. The only challenge there is all we're doing is making a clone of it, and we're still trying to expand the genetic diversity of the corals so that fragging is absolutely one direction we're going, but we have to tie in sexual reproduction, otherwise our diversity is going to be askew.
Thanks a lot.
Mhm.
Anybody else have questions? Yes, sir.
What does the time period look like before you can begin reintroducing these young coral back into the ecosystem that's being ravaged by this disease? I mean, do you have to give that disease some time to burn its way through before you can bring this healthy coral back in?
Yeah, great question. I like how you made that burn through reference because it's totally like it's an analog to a forest fire, right? We pulled samplings out of the forest. There's nothing we can do about the fire. Same type of idea. They have started out planting some offspring. The Florida Aquarium has had some sexual reproduction amongst, I think, 2 species. They have outplanted up to 1,200 pieces of coral in what have been deemed safe locations where we really didn't have an impact from the disease. There's some little pockets out there that haven't been affected. And so they're doing that as kind of trials to see how the offspring coral are going to secure to their, you know, holdfast structure environment and see if they take off. But they've already started kind of the R&D side of outplanting, and then we'll eventually get to the more strategic side where we're looking at genetics and where those genetics need to be placed on the reef. Great question.
I'm a gator. I'm a little slow, but an old Floridian. 2 questions. I love to eat Florida lobster, and I love snapper and grouper. If we lose the reefs on Palm Beach, the dry tortugas, do we lose those fish, the baby grouper and the baby snapper and the baby lobster, and they could disappear because the reef disappeared? That's my question.
Yeah, I absolutely, there's no question there's an impact. Now, like we were kind of talking about earlier, you're going to lose some of those smaller species that are part of that building block of that entire food web, right? And so you might see those species move away from those locations. And, you know, everything again is connected. So it would most certainly have an impact if we lost the reefs. Now, again, there are some species of coral that are still there, but these are what we call the reef builders. These are the massive boulder and pillar corals that really hold the stability of the reef itself. So there's no question that if we lose these species entirely, it's going to have an impact. No question.
Great presentation. Thank you very much for that. I just spent 3 days snorkeling in the Gulf out off of Homosassa, scalloping, which was awesome. And and I'm not an expert at all on this, but snorkeling around, I saw a lot of what looked like coral in the grasslands out there. And they're all independent of each other. You know, they didn't seem to be connected. Does this disease spread beyond the connected reef to where it could affect all those little individual corals everywhere? And if not, does transplanting the babies out there where they're not connected, does that help?
Yeah, it's interesting because they have seen transmission over a pretty long distance. Again, if you think about that leap from the west of Key West to the Marquesas to the Tortugas, which I think from Key West Tortugas, is that 80 miles? Does that sound right? Something like that. So it made that leap. What's interesting though is we think there could be transmission from ship ballast. It could be people just moving in boats and whatnot from point A to point B and somehow carrying that, you know, things get stuck to the hull. That's reaching just a little bit. But it's that idea of even moving ballast water from one location to another on big ships. That's one of the suspects for what happened, you know, that leap down to the Southern Caribbean. So anything like that is possible. Now, as far as when they outplant though, they're looking at these safe zones to be able to do that. But your point about what you see in the Gulf, it is possible, but as you move further north, you see slightly different species than what's being impacted at the reef, you know, along the coast. So, yeah.
Mine is not a question, it's a statement. You guys, SeaWorld takes a lot of hits from a lot of bad places. But I just want to say how proud I am to live in an area where a company like SeaWorld does so much to rescue manatees and other sea life, and the research you're doing here. Kudos to you as a corporation.
Thank you. I've been listening to the questions going around, and I wanted to come back to the point for a second because it's an opportunity to talk about invasive species. And any of you with kids and grandkids that are in this hobby or the reptile hobby, you hear about the pythons. The lionfish are far worse. 6 years ago, I did an article for the New York Times about how the lionfish had jumped from the Bahamas over to the reef. That was from a fish farm. But they were already on the reef because of people throwing what they think is this pretty innocent fish into the ocean to save it rather than kill it. Well, the groupers that you were talking about and the lobster babies, that's their food. They're from the South Pacific. And correct me if I'm wrong, but in the South Pacific, they get eaten like peanuts by predators. They have no predator here. But if we bring that predator here, it also goes after humans, so it will destroy the reefs. But a lot of this problem is caused by man.
That's right.
I didn't mean for you not to comment. Sorry.
Good stuff.
Well, my colleague from Miami University has.
All the black guys need to hug together. You know, scaling up, obviously that room doesn't replace all the reef that's on the Florida coast. How do you scale this past that group of 20 companies? Are you pulling in hobbyists? You know, coral prices have gone radically high in the 10 years I've been out of it. You know, how do you get more water to have more animals?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are more facilities that are starting to come online. And, you know, even SeaWorld and Disney are looking a little more closely at what we have infrastructure wise and what we can do in part because as we get into this reproductive phase of the program, which is the key to the whole thing. This was just step one to get them in a safe place, right? Get them out of the environment, get them away from the disease. We have to have these grow out facilities for the offspring. So that's the next step. And you're right, we have to get more, you know, we have to get more gallonage out there, more holding, and that's the next step. But it is going to happen because these guys have thousands, tens of thousands of babies. So.
Jim, one last question, but since we wrap up, what's your assessment? Do corals grow fast enough so that the ones that are being farmed, I'm going to use that term, are we growing them fast enough to replace the ones that are dying in the reef? And what's the overall assessment of success of this effort?
Well, there's a lot of unknowns, but they do not grow very fast. In fact, some of those pictures that you saw where you have a coral head that's, you know, a couple of feet in diameter, that can take decades to get to that size. So they are very slow growing, but we are very hopeful that we can have a significant impact, especially as we try to protect the environment. So.
What about some of the closed Disney parks that they have, the older ones that they're not even using anymore?
Sorry, the gentleman was asking about some of the parks, the Disney parks that are currently not in operation. Is that correct? They are definitely looking at their infrastructure. And I can't tell you to what degree, but I do know our partners have talked quite a bit about what else they can offer from their current, you know, real estate. So, yeah.